One of the other things in the list of principles of animation is straight ahead action and pose to pose. Rather than really being a principle of something that you should do, it's more a description of two different approaches to animation, two different workflows. There are certain idiosyncrasies to the way that hand-drawn animation works and comes together mainly, which sometimes mean that one method or the other is favoured. However, the most basic uses of them still apply very strongly in computer animation. So, how do they work? Well, quite simply, pose to pose is done in this sort of a fashion. As you can see, there's no movement taking place, there's just a series of key poses from within that movement. The character essentially snaps or jumps to each of these poses just in sequence like that, with no transitions in between. When played back, what you essentially have is some kind of very low frame rate animation, nothing more. Even though your scene may be playing back at 25 or 200 frames a second, that doesn't matter because there are no transitions between the poses. You're just seeing this sort of very low resolution version of the motion. For straight ahead action, you're basically doing exactly the same thing. You're still keying up your character at different poses at different times. The difference is the fact that you simply allow your keyframes to have some transition in them. Whether you're keying those transitions yourself manually as in between keys, or whether you are of course just having the same keyframes but letting the computer interpolate the positions between them. Which incidentally is what we have going on here. These are the exact same recorded keyframes as we just saw in pose to pose. They've just been converted over to linear so that the computer interpolates all of the motion between. So what's the real difference in terms of the practice and the workflow? Well, generally, let's imagine, for instance, that we're keyframing a walk cycle here, shall we? With straight ahead action, you just go along like this, posing your parts, working through your timeline, sketching out your motion as you go. Often you'll be doing bits at a time, so as you can see here, I've just done some motion on the root and a bit on the feet there. And you'll often tend to tween as you go, so I'll pick that foot up at this frame here, creating the lift sort of motion there. Do the same for this foot as it starts to come forward, creating its lift motion there. And so working like this, your animation gradually starts to take shape over time. It sort of evolves as you key more and more parts over more and more time. Working like this, you are starting immediately with things in motion. This has certain advantages, mainly the fact that it focuses your attention on the motion completely right from the beginning. Consequently, you start out immediately working on your timing and spacing, and you have the opportunity to build that in whilst you're keyframing along. It's a good method and a good workflow for helping with the practice of creating smooth and flowing motion. The disadvantage is that you have a lot more work ahead of you before you really get to see the result of your scene or animation as a whole. Obviously, as we see here, this is pretty bland and basic. I have to do, much more detailed work on keyframing the feet here. I've still got to keyframe the spine and the arms and everything else. Should I go along and just continue doing hips and feet, hips and feet, hips and feet out into the timeline here? Should I just work on one cycle and put in arms and spine and head and everything else, and then go to the next bit and do feet and hips and arms and spine and head and gradually build it out like that? It can take me some time and an awful lot of keyframing work before I really start to see the appeal of my animation and how successfully that is coming out, as well as how the motion as a whole is working from the aspect of staging. You can also find yourself caught up sometimes trying to maintain fluidity and smoothness, and this can rein you back on occasion from creating exaggeration in some of your posing and action, as you're trying to work a pose or an action to fit and flow in with motions that are already established elsewhere. And if you want to make larger scale changes, then you've got to work back through motions that you've already keyed up and massage those along the way as well. Conversely, working pose to pose gives you the advantage that you're not having to deal with all of these transitions between your major poses. You're not having to worry about, details like overlap and follow through going into, all the little subtleties of motion. There might be overlap and follow through in your posing, as we see here with this, baseball pitch. We've still got anticipation there. We've got the action here. and then of course we've got the follow through there. But it's just single block poses that we're clicking between here. All of the intricate detail of the motion is currently missing. It hasn't been created yet. Working like this means that you can go through almost an entire animation and really start sketching it out. It allows you to work very quickly in getting the entirety of your animation planned down. It helps you to focus on staging, on appeal, on exaggeration. It helps you to really focus on your key poses, those signature shapes that you're putting a character into in order to communicate what's going on in the scene. The disadvantage to it is that you're largely not getting as much of a sense of the motion, or rather you're having to view the motion at, as I say, this sort of much reduced frame rate. As such, it makes it difficult to, work on your transitions across things. It can also, depending on the motion, be difficult to judge timing. Here we've got what have we got, 6 till 14 there. This is an 8-frame space to perform this action, and then after that, we've got this 3-frame timing to hit the follow-through position there. Is this good and correct timing for our scene to be taking here? Is this good and correct timing for our character in this motion? I mean, it sort of looks pretty good when you just play it back like this. But it's also not uncommon to find that once you come out of pose to pose and transition your keys into interpolated mode, that the timings you've keyed don't always hold up so well. Certain moves start to look a little slow, or other ones perhaps a little too fast. We can demonstrate this very easily, in fact. Let's just take all of the controls for this guy. And so, of course, we see the frame there at 14 where he's, done his pitch forward. Let's just drag it all the way out here. So what are we doing now? We're doing frame 6 to 20 for him to hit his pitch. Now, that's over half a second to, throw something hard and fast. Clearly, that's going to be way too slow. However, if we watch it playing back, it still appears really nice and snappy, really nice and fast. Reason why, of course, because we do, in a pose-to-pose workflow, snap immediately to this pose. Therefore, the sense of the transition that we get in our minds whilst watching it back is a sense of a fast, snappy action. When in actual fact, of course, the timing that we have laid into our keys here is anything but fast and snappy for that particular movement. You also get sort of the opposite thing occurring on holds. We come into the anticipation here where he winds up, ready to perform the pitch. Now, he's not just going to hit that point and then immediately come out of it and start throwing. When you wind up to throw something like this, throw a ball, throw a punch, whatever, you sort of lag there for a minute. You make a hold. The hold itself is sort of a part of the anticipation. It's also part of the slow in, slow out as you go from going back and then change direction to going forward. You're switching your directions of movement. Of course, in pose to pose, this holds there, really nicely for a certain amount of time until again you snap out to the next pose. We've only got one key that is defining this pose in time. We don't have a keyed up hold for it. So we have no real sense, at least in our keyframe structure, of how long that anticipatory pose is being held for before he snaps out of it. As such, pose to pose can distract you from your timing, your spacing, and your transitions. Generally, the most common workflow that you'll see an awful lot is to try and combine the two methods. Pose to pose allows you to very quickly knock out a large scale, longer time motion. So you can really sketch out your ideas of the different key poses, the acting choices, the staging choices, and get a sense of everything that your character needs to do without having a great long laborious amount of work to do first. Very useful for building out or trying out different plans of where the character's going and what they're doing in a certain shot or sequence. But what you'll then do very swiftly once you've got these very broad strokes that you're happy with is that you'll start to detail things in. And so you'll start putting in some of the midpoint transitions, some of the key in-between points that occur between major poses. You might even do this while still working in a pose-to-pose fashion. If you remember in the introduction, we said to go and have a look on YouTube or the like for different animation progression work. What you'll find is that there's an awful lot of work out there where you've got large amounts of animation still done in a pose-to-pose fashion. There's an awful lot of in-betweening and detail pose work where the animator still hasn't come out into fully interpolated keys. Doing that allows you to really start to hone in on the timing of your scene and the timing of your motion, while still having this very simple key structure that allows you to edit and move things around in time, to tweak and change that timing as necessary. But once you've got enough detail in your pose-to-pose work, whatever point you judge that to be enough, as much detail as you can really see coming from pose-to-pose, you then switch over to interpolated and run through the rest of it straight ahead, at which point you work on your spacing, the details of your timing, make sure that your overlap, follow through and all of that is working nicely to give smooth, fluid motion. So there you have it. Pose to pose and straight ahead animation, the two main workflows for working with a character over a series of time for producing fully animated action sequences.